inspired yet? So we have, that concludes our videos, but we have a live presentation now with those who were involved in creating a school for homeless children here at Trinity and in Phoenix. And to introduce and facilitate that, here is Dave Howell.
Hey everybody. Yeah, my wife and I and our kids moved here in 1986 and been at Trinity basically ever since. I've seen a lot of things come and go around here. And I'm trying to remember, New Leaf, what was the name before it was New Leaf?
Prehab in Arizona.
Yeah, Prehab. Yeah, and at New Leaf, it took me a while to get used to New Leaf as the name, but I get it. Turn over to New Leaf. ICM is now Nourish. Rosie's House is still Rosie's House. But the other organization that we're here to talk about tonight started out just before the Howells moved to Phoenix. Central Arizona Shelter Services was founded and created in 1985. And I want to bring up our three guests who were part of really from the beginning, CAS, as it was known by its acronym, and then how CAS came to Trinity. So first, Bill Jameson, who was very involved in a lot of things around this city. Those of you who are familiar with Access, this is the godfather of Access, as I understand it. Working for the state of Arizona at that time, correct? Correct. But then he came to work for the diocese, and that's where we get connected. And then Derek Johnson and Mike Pollecki. Mike is a retired Phoenix firefighter. Derek, you're an almost retired member of the department, right? Almost, like within weeks. But Derek and Mike were Phoenix firefighters I don't know, you guys probably started in the 70s. Maybe the 50s, Mike? 75. Both of them were also very involved in the Firefighters Union, and I've known all three of these folks almost since we moved here through various iterations of my life. But they all had a part to play in bringing CAS essentially to Trinity. And Bill, I'm going to start with you, because you were at the diocese or connected to the diocese when the community decided that the homeless problem needed some work, and it led to the creation of CAS. But the diocese had a part in that too, didn't it? Yeah, and Derek's got the mic. If you guys can just pass it back
Thanks.
and forth.
I don't know about you guys, but I got to stand up and stretch for a minute. You've been sitting for a long time, so feel free to get up and move. I left Phoenix in 1971 with my wife and 3-month-old daughter, and returned in 1978 with my wife and 2 daughters. And it was a great joy to be back. My connection to Trinity begins with my grandfather at the very beginning of Trinity's beginning. My dad was confirmed here. I was ordained here. I didn't begin going to church here until I got a call from Joe Heaton and said, "I'm transferring you to the cathedral," which I was very fine with. We were living right behind All Saints. But one day, when I was sitting in my office down at the Capitol building, I got a call from Bishop Heaton and asked me if I would come in and have some lunch with him. I said, certainly. And let me interject here just a second. Watching those videos are very moving, but particularly seeing Rebecca, who is proof, just like good wine, that you get better with age. I haven't seen her in 20 years. She's just extraordinary. That power of speaking is still there. Anyway, he asked me if I would come in and talk to him about the homeless crisis. The only thing I knew about the homeless crisis is that a conservative Republican legislator named Tony West and I, a liberal Democrat working for a Democratic governor, we would, and he was a deacon in the Roman Church, we would walk down and deliver meals at a Catholic, was it St. Mary's, or I can't remember what the name of it was. And I realized at that point that there was a homeless problem in this community that I really, truly hadn't seen. Joe said to me that we need to do something about this. The church is the place to take a lead. Not necessarily be the lead, but to take a lead. He had put together something called Bert, Bishop Executive Roundtable, which included himself as the Episcopal bishop, the Roman bishop, the Lutheran bishop, the Methodist bishop, and the executive of the Presbyterian Church. And he'd called them together and wanted me to talk to them about how do you mobilize public opinion and begin to change public opinion, or at least move them in a direction of an issue which they don't particularly want to tackle. And I said, well, most of my work is with people who are very poor, and mostly families and children. But yeah, let's give it a try. And Joe mobilized these folks to begin talking to business leaders who were Episcopalians, Catholics, Presbyterians, Methodists, and Lutherans, trying to build a force of people around the issue of homelessness that would affect the Arizona legislature. They don't necessarily listen to us, but they listen to the business community leaders. We can't say we started CAS, but we can say we had a big influence in the beginning. Then Joe called me one day and said, it's getting really cold, and there's no place for folks to go in the wintertime. Go over and talk to Tim, who is the priest in charge here, and see if we can't figure out how to put people into this church on cold nights. And we did that. Which was transforming for me, sleeping on the floor here with a bunch of people who were homeless. And it's one thing advocating for a group of people, it's another thing being among them. Jesus said, I am among you as one who serves. That really piqued my interest. Then in 1985, I think it was, no, maybe earlier than that, 83, a young woman who was working for Bill Schultz, who was running for governor, Mary Orton, said she needed an office. Well, Kenan and I had just started our business, and we were officing in one of those places where there's a whole bunch of offices, and one person answers the phone for everybody. So we had a place that was about as big as this area right here. And we put a desk in there for Mary, and I got to know her. And I can't say that I got her hired at CAS, but I played a role in organizing people to support her. Mary had worked grassroots kind of liberal politicking. She didn't have a lot of friends who were more conservative, who she needed to get to know. And Joe helped her with that. I helped her with that. Coming here to church helped her with that. She was in and out. Mary wasn't really a church person. And then once she got going, that relationship continued. The real work was done by these folks. The last piece I will add to it has to do with the homeless school. After I was, Joe had said, after I sold my business, Joe said, I want you to work at the cathedral. I want you to be the administrator, and I'm not going to pay you anything. So we were in that little house over here, the one that became the bishop's house, but it was falling down. Some bishops wanted to burn it down. Mike told me all I had to do was put some Brill cream mixed in with some kerosene or something in there. And but we really figured out, and these guys, Mike in particular, played a huge role in into saving this property. When churches up north had decided they wanted to sell it all and move the cathedral. So Mike taught us how to work the Phoenix Historical Commission, which wouldn't then let us tear down the building. So it had to be rebuilt. This guy I met when my daughter, who I think she was 14 or something at the time, said she thought she loved firefighters. She just didn't see how she could ever be happy with a person who was not a firefighter. And so I arranged for her to have a visit, I think through Mike, and she met him. And when I told her that I was coming here and I'd probably see Derek, she said, "Oh, tell him I still love him." She's going to turn 50 this year, which blows my mind. My baby granddaughter, I don't feel old until I realize my baby granddaughter is 23 and just graduated from the University of Arizona. All the way from North Carolina, came out here to school, to my school, my parents' school, my grandmother's school. I don't know, do you want me to touch on anything else?
No, I can take it for the next step, and we'll get to how the school got started. The Central Arizona Shelter Services, the first building, it was like either an old warehouse or an old car dealership or something, down on south of Jefferson at, what, about 13th Avenue, 14th Avenue?
1209 West Madison.
Okay. And it's now part of what's known as the Human Services Campus, which is a spectacular facility, but it started out pretty humbly. The firefighters, as most of you I'm sure know, they also act as as the emergency medical team for the city of Phoenix. They don't just fight fires, they see Phoenician residents in all sorts of situations and crises, and that, I'm sure, brought you guys, your teams, into contact with the homeless population pretty regularly. So how did the firefighters get directly involved in CAS? And then one of the things that happened at CAS is they started seeing more and more families. Families have kids. The kids needed to be in school. Well, that meant creating a school essentially in that old warehouse on Madison. And I'll let you guys, Derek, you and Mike, pick it up from there.
You know, there was a complicated transition of what was going on downtown with homeless and with shelter itself. There used to be, I believe it was about 26 single-room occupancy hotels, low-end hotels meant for one person staying in a room. And those were being cleared out in mass under urban renewal. We were at a station that was on 2nd Street in Madison. It was Skid Row then. Very interesting place. Between the bars and the bullets and everything else, it was, to tell you when you're young and dumb, it was a great place to be, if you like action. But what we ran on was a lot of folks, and you could sort of tell the ones that were simply working poor and those that were inebriates and facing greater challenges. But when things really changed in a spectacular way was right before Terry Goddard was elected during the Reagan recession. And all of a sudden the numbers blew up. If you remember at Carnegie Park, there was about 300 homeless in that park. That was where the sort of the rougher male end of the homeless population was. Go catty corner over there, and there was a different encampment there, significantly homeless with families. We're talking 150, 200 people at least with children. In fact, one night on Christmas Eve, we took the toys the Marines didn't pick up. They used to have the Toys for Tots program. We went out and bought more toys. We bought a bunch of food. This was a spur-of-the-moment thing, not planned. And we took all that down with a fire truck. And after watching Apocalypse Now, some of us had speakers in the front end of the truck so you could pop out some music. If you remember the helicopters. And so we had Christmas music, and we pulled up, put them on, and out of the firelight, you see these kids coming out. And, you know, for many of us, that was like a defining moment. Because when CAS was a fledgling idea with Mary, and Mary was spectacular in this saga, and nobody would know us because she was very business-like, tough manager. But how many days she walked out of that building, got in her car, and just cried because of the trauma that she was witnessing all day and the difficulties of the process. She probably went 2 years when she couldn't guarantee a second month of pay for the staff that you couldn't operate without. It was a shoestring kind of a thing. But as that was just starting, you had what Bill was talking about, the business community. A lot of them didn't want any services down here or any. Where do they think they're going to go? Our good friend Bill Mitchum was suggesting Levine. And, you know, I don't know what planet he was on to suggest Levine. They're not going to go out there. Every homeless population congregates where there's a lot of people and food sources. Anyway, so when the fires were involved in the district system election, which was then a new system of electing people, and Terry Goddard led that for us and got the district system and became the mayor. And I mean, from the day he walked into the office, it was a real challenge because this homeless thing had just hit in a huge way. And he couldn't get the business community initially to respond. Bill was working on one end with his connections, but Terry asked us to do something. He had to get something moving that looked visible. And I remember when we had a union meeting, and I don't know, about 150, 200 members, and we're asking them to delay a set of benefits that were supposed to go into place, like in January, and move those back to July, and take that money and give it to the mayor for the homeless problem. And we're selling it, saying, hey, look, we went through all this stuff to get our guy elected, and he's in trouble. We got to get him some help. and the members voted for it. I look back at that, and that was a stunning, unusual achievement for a union, period. And that was like the seed money, and Terry used that to show other business people that somebody was willing to come forward to try to get some momentum. And that's what got Cass going. But the building that Dave was talking about was a 2-story. It was part warehouse and offices in the old days. It was actually a pretty good place where you could park 3 different kinds of shelters. You had simply the homeless. And from the get-go, Cass was a hand up, not a handout. But we had case management and such right from the beginning. You had that going, and then you had a nicer area, which was the working men's shelter. And then upstairs, you had women and family. And in the family end of it, there was a room of some size where you had the children where they can spend part of the day. You couldn't put them with the regular population. As time's going by, there was more than one school district that Mary tried to deal with, and finally Isaac sort of responded. I didn't fully understand it, but all of the less well-heeled school districts have plenty of problems. Among the top ones was 75–80% turnover every year in their population, so they couldn't take on a new, formidable, difficult population of any size at all. So, but what we knew is our kids were getting tortured. You may be with a bunch of other poor kids, but if they got a house and you don't, you're different. And it's regrettable about the way we look at differences. And so I heard that was going on, and I'm thinking, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to give the mic to Derek, because there was a single call that sort of tipped the balance about us trying to figure something out.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Bill and Dave. So as Mike was saying, we worked downtown here, and we would go to the shelter, and every once in a while we would go for maybe a trash fire, we would call it. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and there were some boxes that were burning, and there was a family over there. They kind of watched us put the fire out. And what's typical when you leave a fire, you look back to see if everything is out. And I kind of looked back out of the truck, and I saw 2 little kids and a mother kind of going through the burned out boxes. So I thought, what is that about? So the next morning I go back and realize that all of these children, and this is probably 9:30 in the morning, were all kind of in between the warehouses. And there's probably about 80 or 100 of them. So Mike and I started talking, and you could tell Mike and I kind of want to see what challenges we can get into. And so he just said, what's on your mind? And I said, it's funny, there's a group of kids that live down by the shelter, and it's the middle of the day, and they're not in school. And he said, well, you know what, there's a little school down at the shelter, has about 9 kids in it, and there's a lady named Mary Wharton, and why don't we go visit her? So we go down and we visit her. And there was a teacher there who had was sort of her first time ever teaching. And prior to that, there was a teacher of a firefighter that worked at a station where we worked at. And there was a beautiful lady named Marcia Newman. She was from New York. She was from the Bronx. And she had went to Comic Relief and actually got some money to start this school inside the shelter, sort of a one-room schoolhouse. So we walked in there, and the kids were there, and I said, what do you need? And she said, well, these kids don't know how to read. They don't know how to play games. So anything you can do. So we grabbed a group of firefighters. We had a fancy name called Firefighters Helping Homeless Kids. That's all we could think of. So we got about 20 guys. They all went down there. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would teach with her, and simple little things like ABCs, numbers, that kind of thing. And then on Wednesdays and Fridays, we would take them out and we would just play games with them. And the thing that was so funny, if you were playing kickball with homeless kids, when they kick the ball, they chase it. And then when they get it, when the other kids come after them, when they start fighting them. So it's a little hard teaching them the rules. So as that's going on, and I'll let Mike speak to this part, someone walked in and said, the school has to close. They need the space there. And we were kind of, what do you mean the school's got to close? And they said, we need the space. And as we were talking, one of the things that happened was Clay Thompson, who's no longer with us, he was a reporter.
And a parishioner here.
And he had walked in, one of the kids looked at him and said, are you a firefighter? And he said, no, and they shunned him. They just looked at him and they just walked away from him. And he looked over at me and he goes, did I say something wrong? And I go, no, there's a group of firefighters here and he just thinks you're a firefighter. And Clay says, well, I'm not. And he goes, well, what are you guys doing? And we talked about it. And right at that moment, the kids were getting out. A little boy came up. It was he's probably 9. His brother was 7. They had a sister. And they just got introduced into the school. And we used to give the kids frozen yogurts and treats, and we didn't have any. And he started crying, and we tried to console him, and we said, there'll be more tomorrow. And he said, no, you don't understand, there won't be any tomorrow. And we said, sure, there'll be some more tomorrow, and we'll have some yogurt for you. And he kept crying, and it got to the point where he was unconsolable. And I said, what's wrong? You okay? And I said, we'll get you some yogurt. Even if we have to go out and buy you some yogurt, we'll buy you some yogurt. And there'll be yogurt tomorrow. And he said, no, you don't understand. There won't be a tomorrow. And I remember thinking to myself, what's going on in a newly homeless family, a 9-year-old boy who has lost that much hope? And so that kind of got us to thinking about the school. And I'm going to give it back to Mike for a little bit. And he'll share some things with you, and I guess we'll keep trading back and forth.
Yeah, and Mike, and before I want to fill in a blank or two here, Clay Thompson Trinity wasn't a big congregation. We're talking now in the early 90s, I think, right around 1990. But we had, the people who were here were involved in everything, and Clay at the time he later became famous for Valley 101, or his regular column. But at that point, he was, back when there was such a thing as the Phoenix Gazette, he was on the Gazette staff, and his beat was basically social services. So he was, and he had a heart for it as well as a profession for it, but he was busy doing stories about places like Cass and the people who volunteer there and the people who live there and what brings it around. And he was part of the connection, but Mike, I think Bill was part of the connection eventually as well, correct?
We're going to get to Bill.
Okay.
Bill and this place is fundamentally a life preserver of this program that went on for over 10 years. It would not have stayed, it would have been exhausted about 3-4 years into the process. Fundraising was very, very difficult. I got to tell you two things that occurred, though, that before we go to Bill, that I just adored. One is we had a firefighter that was inspecting, his unit was inspecting a building with a lot of used furniture, a lot of used old office kinds of stuff. And then there was a bunch of smaller desks over there with chairs, and he starts talking to the guy, and by the time they're done, they got desks donated. So for the first time, you had a room full of desks and chairs that worked. But our best thing is there's a guy, and I can use his name now because the statute of limitations is way old. His name was Jack Martel, and he ran the Paradise Valley school system. He served 3 different governors on their staff. And at the time, he was back at the school district, Paradise Valley, as a superintendent. And he heard about this thing with the Clay Thompson articles. And so he started talking to me. He goes, well, what do you need? And I said, well, you know what we get? We got a teacher, we got a desk, but we're sort of short of books. And he says, okay. And he gives me an address, and he says, get there at something like 6 o'clock in the evening. And he goes, go to the south building on the right side, something like that. And he said, just show up. And he goes, bring a truck or two. And so we had 2 pickup trucks that showed up. Well, I was driving one, and Derek had the other. And so we go to where the rolling door is, and it just starts rolling up. And Jack come out and says, look, it's labeled by grades. Just take what you need. And he leaves. So he was not a witness. And we drove away with two pickup trucks of books. So at least we had that covered. As we're just getting exhausted with ad hoc fundraising. And we had shopped the program around to school districts here, and that's when I found out their problems were formidable, and there was no way they could take on another big problem. And the population was outgrowing where we were, and they needed it for more family space up above. So we were facing a real crisis, and I can't remember exactly what the event was, but it was a breakfast setting where Derek and I was talking, and we met with you. It was not for the purpose of this, but he goes, well, what's going on? And we were talking about this thing, and Bill got into it and said, you know, I might be able to have a space for you to do something here. Well, it was more than a space. It was a church commitment. It was a life preserver. It was so we could cut our overhead, and eventually we found some more institutional financing. We won't go into that whole part of the saga. But I was thinking on the way over here what this whole thing was, and it was amplified by everything I've seen. This is a sacred place, not because anybody blessed it or prayed on it, but because of what all you have done and affected the lives with people doing things that Christ would have been proud of. And so I just want to praise you and Bill for not sitting around and overthinking the strategy or whatever. He just decided, after hearing us for about an hour, that he was going to make a difference here. And he picked up and he ran with the ball, and he had a parish here that was willing to pick up on it and run with it. And so I'm going to give it back to Derek just to give a glimpse of what was here, because Derek was heavily involved with the teacher and the bigger population of students that drove him out of his mind. And the power of what this place was, both the setting and what it was doing, because those kids had a lot of problems. We were firemen. I won't go through the problems of us trying to figure out how we ran a school. But I'll tell you this, it was more than a school, because the kids needed to be screened and protected, trying to figure out what the problems were at home, finding out some specific problems of abuse. It was a whole screening system of preserving their lives and their psyches. And this was the brightest part of their day. And so talk about what that was like when we came here. Bill, thank you. That program would have ended in about 4 years' time without you. Thank you.
And I can't say any more about it than Mike did as far as our gratitude to you and to the church, because at the time, no one wanted homeless people. And so one of the things that happened is this church had been doing so much that the neighborhood was tired of it. They didn't want any more homeless people. They didn't want any more social programs. And the kids were literally going to be on the street. And just to explain to you a little bit about their lives, these children would be homeless. They would be in a crowd of people that would go from whatever spectrum you want to think of criminality to mental illness to poverty. It was nothing for us to go on a homicide and have these children to have witnessed it, and then standing next to the body of someone they knew. They had ways of protecting themselves where it was extortion. So the children had to do certain things to keep the mothers safe. So these kids had no place to go. And so when Bill came to us and said, and I remember how he said it to me, he goes, do you want to fix something or do you want to talk about something? And I remember, most people just don't talk to you like that. They just kind of say, well, what are you thinking? He just said, do you want to fix something or do you want to talk about something? And he said, if you want to fix something, I'm going to teach you. And he became a mentor of mine. And he taught me a lot of things about politics, the community, and he said, but do you want to change something or do you want to make a difference? And those, if you think about those words, do you want to change something or do you just want to make a difference? And I said, I want to change something. And he said, what is that? And I said, I just simply want kids to go to school. I don't want them living on the streets. So we had a meeting here, and he said, I got to teach you how to deal with the community. And we had a meeting, and I remember the neighborhood said, you can have those kids under one condition. They come to school, you can't have more than about 50 of them, they can't make noise.
They didn't follow all the rules.
Yeah. They can't bring any of their family problems. There can't be any services that would bring their families here, and you can't provide any services for them here. It's a pretty, you think, then we're thinking the school. So in the back room here, and I think we're going to visit it later, we had about 30 kids. They went from kindergarten to 6th grade. When we got there, the kids would be from anywhere where they maybe were in school, had been out of school for maybe 6 months, so they could catch up pretty easy, or they would be out of school for 2 or 3 years and maybe never had really got their basics down. There was issues with nutrition, PTSD. It was very common for a kid to have witnessed a crime that morning or that night. There was no transportation here. There was no way to get them from wherever, and they came out of the river bottoms, they came out of housing, wherever they were coming from. So as we got the kids here, we built a curriculum, and to show you how this church, and Bill, all of you, embrace these children. You cleaned the bathrooms for us. You picked up after these kids. Every day that these kids came to the school, they had a clean place. It was a welcoming place. You fed them. We didn't have money for food. They fed them. This was one of those things that just tugs at your heart. You would see the kids start to stuff their food in their pockets, and you would ask them, what are you doing? And they'd say, I need to take this home to my mom. And they'd take this home to my little brother. They would come to school and they would say, can I just go see if my mom's still alive? And so this is the kind of thing that the place you created for these kids. Well, these kids start to not just flourish. We actually have to use San Pablo for junior high. We wind up being over at UMOM. We expand over there. Long story short, we wind up in an old car dealership. Then we have a full-fledged school. Bill Clinton visited that school. George W. Bush visited that school. We had congressional field hearings about that school. It was able to get such attention to it that we had Miss America became involved with fundraising. Bill Brotherton, Bill says, I've got this guy I want you to meet, and just work with him. So Bill became an integral part. We were able to raise money from the Suns, the Cardinals, the Chicago Bulls. I mean, this opened this place up, and then the biggest thing is that it set the framework and the example of how to educate homeless children that became law. And Bill, I want to thank you for that. Thank you. I can't tell you for what you've done, and I'm on a little personal note. My wife probably wouldn't want me to share this, but she worked in a governor's office, and before I married her, and met her. I was on the board or a commission, and she kept hearing about this homeless school. And every once in a while, she'd ask me these questions about it, and I thought, things we did and all this stuff. And she just kept asking too much, and I thought maybe she was a cop. Because I know we got some books. So after we were married, we're with our families, and she looks up at me and she tears up a little bit, and she says, my brother was homeless for a while. I said, oh, he's doing fine. She goes, my nieces and nephews were just little, 3, 5, 6, something like that. I said, okay. She goes, they went to Thomas Baptist School. And this was probably 10 years after the fact. So you never know when somebody does such a gracious thing that it affects your life and you didn't even know it. So.
You know, we've just about used up the allotted time. So, Mike, if you
Just
have
one ending, the
last
ending of the
word or
story
two.
here. The school finally got picked up by Sandra Dowling, who was superintendent of schools for the county. And Sandra was rough and ready, rock-ribbed conservative, and tougher than hell. She was a former Marine.
She's running for Congress.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
She's
she
always
is running. She's one of the challengers for Paul Gosar in his seat.
She'd be improvement over that. But the thing was, we had never gotten to systematic funding, and she had there's a thing called the Accommodation School that every county has. It's really, they got special missions they're allowed to operate right out of the county as a school. And she started doing that, but there was no provision for homeless schools. And so when the county attorney at the time said, you can't do this, there's nothing in law that allows you to do this, she said, you shut it down, I'll hold the press conference. And I said, just tell him, give us 6 months. And in 6 months, we went through the legislature and got the homeless as a legal expenditure, but we'd been flying blind. She picked it up. It lasted for a good number of years, and I would like to say it got mugged by county politics, internal, going back to some of the characters that you're well aware of from the county in past years, and got mugged by those county people, and I believe in a land deal because of where the bigger school, where we ended up with at least 300 kids on site. So it had gotten very big.
But as with several of the stories we've seen tonight, Trinity and the diocese, and in some cases the church community writ large in this town, provided a transitional, the life preserver that you guys described, not unlike the Rosie House story where Trinity played a key role in getting it from Rosie's house, which was really a fascinating place. I visited that place in the 90s. To where they are now, and that's what we do here, and hopefully we'll find many more opportunities to do things like that going forward. Matt, I think I turn it back over to you at this point. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Wow, I feel like I've gone to church, which I have. I'm inspired. And I'm also told that there is dessert somewhere, so I don't know. There is, okay. So I'm supposed to invite you to have dessert right outside these doors, and I don't know if there was anything else from a housekeeping standpoint. Thank you for being here, and my hope is that this is the beginning of the conversation, as I said, about where we go from here. We have some big shoes to fill. Now I'm a little nervous, but thank you all for being here and helping tell the story as we write the rest of the story. Thanks.